Hi, it's May 2022. My name is Rhiannon Simpson. I'm a PhD student at the University of Western Ontario, and I'd like to unpack some of my thinking in regards to an independent study I'm currently undertaking. In his seminal work, Pedagogy, Symbolic Control and Identity, Basil Bernstein theorizes that there exist different discourses and structures of knowledge, which hold different properties and have different applications. He notes a tendency to make assumptions about the way in which knowledge in different content areas is structured, often without conscious consideration of any alternatives. This, he argues, is particularly relevant to the field of education, in which such assumptions form the foundation of the types of knowledges, pedagogies, and curriculum deemed appropriate within its school subject classrooms. This independent study investigates the ways in which the head of music in a school predominantly employing methods associated with popular music education conceptualizes the structure of musical knowledge. In doing so, his thoughts, feelings, and considerations of musical knowledge are compared to those who have applied for an open teaching position in this school, and those he perceives as being implied by the curricula and pedagogy informing pre-service music teacher education programs. It's found that, in contrast to many of the applicants and how he perceives the discourses of music education training, Jeremy conceptualizes musical knowledge as an example of a horizontal knowledge structure, in which popular musicianship serves as a distinct knowledge specialization. So what do any of those words mean? Well, Bernstein distinguishes between two different knowledge discourses, horizontal discourses and vertical discourses. Horizontal discourses are described as everyday knowledges, or that which could be considered common sense. He notes that such knowledges are often learnt by experience, tasks like tying your shoes or learning how to politely greet a friend. In recent writing, Young labels these context-dependent knowledges and argues that their applicability outside of specific situations is limited. On the other hand, vertical discourses require an understanding of theoretical concepts to be understood and applied. These knowledges are agreed upon by specialists in a field and are often applicable across contexts. Mathematical skills or literacy are examples of this. They are therefore commonly labelled as context-independent knowledges. These context-independent knowledges are further subcategorized into two knowledge types, hierarchical knowledge and horizontal knowledges. I know that this is confusing and I have absolutely no idea why Bernstein would use the same descriptor to describe them both. If I could yell at him about it, I would, but it's just what we have to deal with. Within hierarchical knowledge structures, common languages and theories considered applicable across contexts are seen as foundational and are positioned as vital to the development of innovative theories. As a result, this knowledge structure is sometimes represented as a pyramid, with these foundational concepts being necessary to reach more complex and subject-specific knowledges. For example, you have to have a basic knowledge of mathematical principles and Newton's theories if you're going to understand the ways in which gravity works. Importantly, you need this knowledge to be able to foster new theories in the field of physics and thus foster innovation. As a result, these hierarchical knowledge structures are commonly associated with Young and Muller's conceptualization of powerful knowledge, but I'm not going to get into all of that here. On the other side of this coin, Bernstein argues that horizontal knowledges hold a series of specialized languages with specialized modes of interrogation and specialized criteria for the production and circularization of text. Within horizontal knowledges such as sociology or the humanities, parallel theories which may support or contradict others in the field coexist and strive for legitimacy. Bernstein is at pains to highlight the importance of language here, arguing that the specialization of language within different fields is required for a knowledge structure to be considered horizontal. For example, the definition of the concept of capital differs across separate sociological fields, with Marx's definition different to that of Bourdieu's. And though these concepts are undeniably linked, you don't need to understand Marx's conceptualization of capital before you're able to engage with Bourdieu's. This is not the case within hierarchical knowledge structures in which language and concepts are transferable across subject fields. A millimeter is the same length whether you're working in the field of biology, physics, or mathematics, and an understanding of this foundational principle is necessary to engage meaningfully with each field. So all of this capital T theory inevitably leads us to ask, well, what's the structure of musical knowledge? And the thing is, it's likely that you've already formed an uninterrogated opinion on this, and that, if you're an educator, this opinion influences the ways in which you teach. Within much scholarly literature and within many North American university music ed programs, it's often implied that music holds a hierarchical structure, and that there exist foundational principles which can be applied to almost all music types. Concepts like the elements of music, which form the basis of many district school music curriculums and even the national curriculum here in Australia, are often positioned as foundational. Skills like the ability to read 5-line Western notation or an understanding of basic Western harmonic analysis are often positioned as vital within a musician's early learning, and thus foundational to the understanding of more complex musical ideas in the future. It's noted by both supporters and critics of this conceptualization of musical knowledges that, with little exception, musical concepts most commonly associated with art musicianship are considered foundational and therefore necessary within a curriculum which aims to provide access to complex musical knowledges in the future. And when the elements of music are more applicable to Western art musics than other musics, these musics are considered at times more complex or more appropriate within a music classroom. Further, the positioning of concepts associated with art musicianship as foundational to developing musicianship in other genres and styles, whether this is done consciously or not, has the potential to position musical skills not readily associated with art musicianship, like the use of music technologies, improvisation, sampling, or oral learning methods, to be excluded from school curriculum, as is noted by all of these scholars. When music is conceptualized as holding a hierarchical knowledge structure, the job of teachers is considered to be developing this foundation so that students can reach these other more specific concepts in the future, not necessarily within their own classrooms. On the other hand, those who conceptualize musical knowledge as an example of a horizontal knowledge structure may see art musicianship and popular musicianship as knowledge specializations. This implies that knowledges associated with popular musicianship, and therefore popular music education, may have different understandings or definitions of harmonic theory, pitch, rhythm, notation, and the so-called essential skills, and these may contradict those associated with art musicianship. This is not to argue that there's no overlap between musical concepts relevant to art musicianship and popular musicianship. In fact, this overlap may be quite considerable. Rather, it implies that knowledge of concepts specific to one field is not required to develop musical knowledge in the other. Though a knowledge of Italian tempo terms may be considered essential knowledge within the field of art musicianship, there are many successful popular musicians who would look at you completely puzzled if you asked them to play allegro. And though the reading of 5-line Western notation is an essential skill for art musicians to hold, research from Hannon and Herbst and Elbrick note that popular musicians do not consider the ability to read or sight read this notation type to be completely relevant to their future career prospects. Some of the most successful and innovative popular musicians report being unable to read 5-line Western notation, nor have an understanding of the harmonic processes of 18th century musicians. And these are the kinds of skills that are often implied to be foundational within the curriculum of music teacher education programs and the curriculum of many junior music education classes. However, if you don't need these foundational skills to develop complex knowledge within the field of popular musicianship, perhaps popular musicians and popular music educators are more likely to conceptualize musical knowledge as a series of specializations within a horizontal knowledge structure. So let's examine this by looking at our case study. Jeremy James is the head of music at Forreston High School, a public school open to students of all genders located in a regional city in Victoria, Australia. The 7 to 12 school requires that all students engage in music study at grades 7 and 8, offers multiple grade 9 and 10 music electives, as well as VCE music performance and VET music performance pathways at Cert 2 and 3 levels. For those less familiar with the senior pathway system in Australia, VCE is associated with final examinations, which influence your likelihood of being accepted into university study, and VET is more commonly associated with vocational training. Of course, many students engage with both, and these pathways are a lot more flexible than they're often presented as being. The music program at Forreston predominantly employs pedagogical and curricular approaches stemming from the discourses of popular music education. A typical Year 7 or 8 class looks a lot like Powell et al.'s description of modern band. There's a whole class in a room with numerous drum kits, electric guitars, basses, keyboards, and microphones, and together that group learn how to play a popular music song. Middle and senior years instruction at Forreston more commonly employs approaches associated with Green's conception of informal music learning, which includes student-chosen musical materials, a focus on oral learning practices, peer-selected learning groups, non-teleological learning, and a holistic integration of listening, performing, composing, and improvising. In this context, students lead their own learning of student-selected musics within smaller student-selected groups. Recently, Jeremy was tasked with hiring an additional music teacher to teach junior and middle year classes. He was the head of the selection committee and designed the selection and interview process. In doing so, Jeremy was forced to interrogate the kinds of musical knowledges he deemed essential for a music teacher to hold if they were to teach in this program. Throughout this process, he agreed to take part in 4 60-minute-long Zoom interviews, one after the application process had closed and he was beginning to decide who would enter the interview stage, the second after an applicant had been chosen and was preparing to enter the program, another halfway through the school year, and another at the completion of the school year. This presentation reports on the data from the first 2 interviews. The data were coded into 4 themes that express Jeremy's conceptualization of the structure of musical knowledge, which ended up being: knowledge of art musicianship does not imply that teachers have the knowledge to employ methods associated with popular musicianship in the classroom. Institutions largely dominated by art musicianship do not adequately prepare teachers to engage with popular music in the classroom. Informal experiences with popular musicianship outside of formal institutions is of great importance when distinguishing applicants, and music teachers can be retrained to gain essential knowledges within the field of popular musicianship once they enter a school, but this requires explicit effort from current educators. When describing how the selection committee determines who will be put through to the interview stage, Jeremy notes that applicants who only demonstrate a knowledge of art musicianship in their application are immediately excluded from consideration. He said, "Anyone that says to me that they're going to give an example of a classroom environment of instruments of the orchestra and the carnival of the animals and Berlioz's Symphonie die Fantastique, they're out of there." Similarly, when considering the CVs of applicants, Jeremy notes that applicants who are unable to demonstrate an engagement with popular music as performers or as teachers are no longer considered. He argues that if you're a saxophone player and all you've ever done is classical saxophone, or you've ever played is solo classical saxophone, then you're going to struggle in a class with 26 kids all playing electric instruments. I'm not saying that it can't be done, but from our point of view, we need someone who's got a little bit more knowledge than that. This quote discussing the idea of needing more knowledge is incredibly interesting and is what prompted me to consider bringing a Bernsteinian lens to this data in the first place. At this point, it's unclear whether Jeremy conceptualizes musical knowledge as holding a hierarchical structure and that this hypothetical classical saxophonist has just not yet used their foundational knowledge to reach knowledges associated with popular musicianship, or whether he deems knowledge of orchestral instruments or 19th century romanticism as irrelevant to popular music education at all. This would position such knowledge as a knowledge specialisation within a horizontal knowledge structure. Spoiler alert, his position on this does become more clear later. When explicitly asked if he felt that music education programs adequately prepared pre-service teachers with the skills and knowledges to teach in a program like Forreston's, he answers swiftly and unequivocally with no. He laments that crotchets and quavers is still dominantly getting caught in our institutions and argues that teacher education institutions are often behind where we're trying to get to at the ground level in regards to popular music education. He reinforces assertions from music scholars which argue that music teacher education programs are particularly slow to change. In discussing the formal qualifications of teachers who hold a Bachelor of Music, he notes that the content of these programs hasn't really changed since he got his degree over 25 years ago. He states, "I would be worried employing me if, on the basis of the subjects I picked, Baroque music, 19th century classicism, and so things have to move, and I think they are a little bit, but not enough, and nowhere near quick enough." It becomes clear that Jeremy does not think that this foundational knowledge in art musicianship better prepares musicians to gain popular music-specific knowledge as it would if music was conceptualized as holding a hierarchical structure with art musicianship at the base. In fact, when highlighting the extent to which engagement with popular music outside of formal institutional settings is considered advantageous, Jeremy notes that those who have never studied music or music education at university level are just as likely to reach the interview stage than those who's had. Such is the extent to which he considers art music dominant tertiary music programs as not relevant to the practices of popular music educators. Those with teaching qualifications but without formal music qualifications are considered just as likely and in some cases more likely to hold the types of skills he deemed essential to teaching popular musicianship at Forreston. This is not to position educators solely trained in art musicianship as unable to gain these knowledges. Jeremy states, "If the line for success is here, and they're playing saxophone, classical, done symphony, never done anything contemporary, I'm not saying they can't get to here. What I'm saying is that we don't want someone at this level here. We want someone to get from here to here in a shorter amount of time. We're still going to put in the time to work out how we want our classes to run. We don't just want to do all the groundwork of showing them how a power chord or a C chord or an A chord, all those sorts of things." He notes that no teacher is ever fully prepared to teach in a classroom, but that he feels teachers are less prepared to teach using methods associated with informal learning or modern band than they may be to enter more formalised classroom spaces. He states, in all the applicants we've had, there's been days of work with them before they've taken their first class. They'll come and watch us doing one of the classes. We'll go through the process of how the class starts, from them coming into the room to them leaving the room, and all of that. We hold their hand for a little bit. When asked if he feels that formally qualified applicants are likely to hold skills he determined as advantageous, yet not essential to teaching in these settings, like the dialing in of a guitar amplifier, setting up a PA system, or tuning guitars, he states that these are things that 99% of the time we have to explain after an applicant is selected. What I found incredibly interesting, and the nail in the proverbial coffin when determining the ways in which Jeremy conceptualizes musical knowledge, was when I asked if an applicant without any knowledge of music theory, notation, reading, or harmonic analysis would be considered for the position. And he responded with, theory, like if they're teaching year 11 and 12, you're going to have a sound knowledge of that. But they're the sort of things that they can upskill if they need to as we go along. It was here that I noted that Jeremy's conception of the structure of musical knowledge aligned with the pedagogical approaches associated with Green's study of the learning practices of popular musicians. The learning processes associated with art musicianship often hold a teleological structure. If you're hoping to develop a knowledge of a complex musical concept like extended chords, you're likely to begin with teaching triads. Then you might introduce the idea of dominant 7 chords before exploring what an E7 flat 9 chord looks and sounds like. However, Green's study of the learning practices of popular musicians found that non-teleological learning was a hallmark of this process. A beginner guitarist who loves Jimi Hendrix is likely to know how to play an E7 flat 9 chord. This is essential to learning to play most of his songs. This guitarist might not know the name of the chord, they might have never played an E major triad before, but these skills and knowledges are able to be developed afterwards within a non-teleological learning process. The concept of non-teleological learning just does not fit with the idea that musical knowledge could hold a hierarchical structure. The idea that a teacher can learn concepts often deemed foundational within a Bachelor of Music and teacher education programs after they have already entered a classroom, as is implied by Jeremy's quote, demonstrates that he sees popular musicianship as a knowledge specialisation within a horizontal knowledge structure. He notes that teaching VCE music requires the knowledge of concepts more readily associated with art musicianship, but that many of these concepts do apply to popular musicianship also, things like understandings of tonality, key signatures, and etc. But the fact that one can dip into these concepts at a later date implies that this specialised knowledge is considered distinct but accessible for those working within different knowledge specialisations. Thus, one is forced to ask if popular music education is conceptualized as a horizontal knowledge specialization, to what extent do Bachelor of Music and Music Teacher Preparation programs provide teachers with the knowledges required to teach within this specialization? Dissertation research exploring this idea from Martina Vazel found that most music teachers do not feel prepared to integrate popular music and its associated informal music learning practices into their classes because they did not receive specialized training in these areas. Similarly, Hewitt's dissertation work argues that it's possible that music teacher training programs may believe they are providing their students with the necessary knowledge and skills that transfer to incorporating popular music in the classroom, yet pre-service teachers continue to feel unprepared to teach popular music. If art music-centric knowledges, once conceptualized as foundational, do not aid teachers in accessing the kinds of knowledges Jeremy values in his program, how can we ensure that teachers are prepared to engage with non-art music dominant practices in the future? With Wilson and Janert highlighting the widespread growth of popular music educations across the world, and Musical Futures highlighting an increased popularity of these methods in Australia specifically, perhaps a conscious interrogation into the ways in which musical knowledge specialisations and structures are conceptualised in tertiary education programs is increasingly necessary. I know that many tertiary programs here in Australia and abroad are undermining the concept that musical knowledge rooted in art musicianship serves as a foundation upon which all other musical knowledge can be readily accessed and understood. I hope that this Bernsteinian lens and the insight from Jeremy can help others to more consciously interrogate the ways that they conceptualise musical knowledge as teachers, learners, and musicians. Thank you.